elevation. So we're going to show you pericardiocentesis today. Just to show you the kit that we have, so we're using a Kyoto pericardiocentesis task trainer, which is distributed by Limbs and Things. One of the questions we always get asked is about ECG monitoring and ECG guidance. So just to show you what a normal setup would look like. If you've got 3 lead monitoring, you would connect the red and the yellow leads as normal and leave the green lead unconnected. Now most pericardiocentesis packs will come with a cable like this with 2 crop clips at either end. And this is sterile, obviously, and you'd hand one end of it to an assistant who would then connect it to the metallic part of the green electrode. The other end, which remains sterile, would then be used by the operator with the needle that they're using for pericardiocentesis and connected to the needle. That effectively then transforms this needle into an electrode. And when it's in the air, you would just get a flat line or a broken line on the monitor. As soon as it touches the skin and the circuit is completed, you will see an ECG trace. And the principle behind ECG guidance is that if the needle tip touches myocardium, you'll see ST elevation. So if we're going in under negative pressure aspiration, and we keep going in and we see blood back in our syringe, if we've not seen ST elevation on the ECG to that point, we can be pretty confident that we've not gone through myocardium. So that's the principle behind ECG monitoring and ECG guidance for pericardiocentesis. We're going to just talk you through the contents of the kit in a normal pericardiocentesis pack. So starting on this side, there are usually 2 3-way taps. And interestingly, they always have 2 3-way taps. One of them is to connect the drain to the bag and allows a syringe to be put on the 3rd port for aspiration. The second syringe, I think, is historic. If you look back in the literature, you will see that in the early days of doing pericardiocentesis, the prescribed way of doing this was to interspace one of these 3-way taps on the aspiration needle that you're going to be using, which meant that you could have the needle on one end, the syringe on the other for aspiration, and as soon as you got into what you thought was a pericardial space, immediately the tap would be turned to this port here, which would be connected to a pressure line. And then you could ask yourself the question to exclude whether you're in the RV. So if you've got an RV pressure trace, you know that the needle tip was in the RV. So that's for historic reasons, and most people don't tend to use that. In addition to that, we usually have a 10mm syringe. A range of needles are usually present. And the needle that we normally use for pericardiocentesis is this one, which is usually a 14-gauge needle, a Cook or a Cox needle. There is also a second needle in the pack, which most people don't tend to use, but it's a TUI needle or a spinal needle. It has 1 centimetre markers on it and an introducing stylet. If you do use this needle, you've got to be aware that it's quite flexible and easy to bend. So initially, when getting into the pericardial, so getting into the skin, it's important to have the introducer in place and then to remove it before putting the syringe on the end for aspiration. We'll talk a bit more about that with in-plane real-time ultrasound guidance. Most of us will tend to use this needle for pericardiocentesis. You have a scalpel, usually for making a nick in the skin to widen the hole, a swab stick for cleaning up with chlorhexidine at the beginning, a 50mm syringe. This is your 8 French drain, pigtail, and then we have usually an 035 guide wire J-tipped, which is about 80 centimetres long. And all of them, all the packs that I've ever seen, tend to come with one of these, which is often ignored. So this is a sterile pair of crop clips with a wire. One end of it is designed to connect to your needle, as we've shown you at the beginning of this presentation. This spinal needle actually has got a collar on it, which is in continuity with the needle itself, which is specifically designed for the crop clips. And it's designed to take the strain of the bite of those crop clips. The other end you would hand to an assistant who would then connect it to the green electrode as we showed you on the 3D monitor earlier. So that's for ECG guidance. And then the final thing in the pack is a bag, a drainage bag, which you connect to your drain, and usually a mer silk. suture to secure the drain. Just cut that. So we're going to show you on this task trainer how to do pericardiocentesis from the subxiphesternal point. So anatomically, we find the xiphesternum, and just to the left of that is a notch, the xiphesternal notch. And the traditional route for doing this is to go in that subxiphesternum, in the xiphesternal notch, at 45 degrees to the skin, aiming for the left shoulder. So the first thing to do is to get an ultrasound image to look at this pericardial effusion and your proposed trajectory. So if we get into the subxiphesternal space and then do an echo image, we can begin to see what our trajectory looks like. So if that's our traditional trajectory, aiming for the left shoulder at 45 degrees, we can see we've got a nice landing zone to get into the pericardial space. The problem then arises, of course, is that we remove the echo probe at this stage, get a needle in a syringe and go forwards at that point. And immediately we're beginning to think, am I at 45 degrees or am I at 50 degrees? Am I really pointing to the left shoulder, and which bit of the left shoulder am I meant to point to? So I think we need to try and counter that, and the way to counter that is to have a look at your proposed trajectory on the ultrasound image, so left shoulder about 45 degrees, and then see what happens if we're slightly wider than that. So we're going out left, and you can see that we're going to still hit the pericardial space. And then if we swing it back the other way and come more medially, you can see that we're still hitting pericardial effusion. So that gives you a sector that you're aiming for rather than a pinpoint. And then if we go steeper, what happens? We can see we can still hit pericardial effusion. And if we go much shallower, we can see we can still hit pericardial effusion. So it's transformed your trajectory from a pinpoint to something more the size probably of a tennis ball. So that will give you some comfort when you've removed the echo probe and you're trying to do this. The next thing to do is that you'll need an assistant for this, is that we're going to again get the image for our proposed trajectory. We'll freeze that image and we will now measure the distance from the skin, roughly, down to the pericardial space. And I think we've got a measurement of about 3.5 centimetres. So that's really useful. So now we've got a trajectory, which isn't pinpoint, and we also know the depth to which we need to go. So we've now got a lot of information to plan this procedure. So we've transformed the trajectory from a very precise pinpoint to a much larger arc, maybe to the size of a tennis ball. And we also know from the image that the distance from the skin to the pericardial effusion along our proposed trajectory is about 3.5 centimetres. So this is the needle we're going to use, which is a 14 gauge Cook or Cox needle. I'm just going to bring out the 2 needle specifically because it's got centimetre markers on it. So if we now put the 2 together, we can see 1, 2, 3, 3.5. So I should be able to hit pericardial effusion at about that depth. So if I've gone in halfway or beyond with this needle, I know that I'm doing something wrong, I need to come back. So now we're ready to get on and do our pericardiocentesis. We're going to do this with ECG guidance, and the croc clips, which are sterile, which come in the pack, have now become very useful. So I'm going to hand one part of this to an assistant, and she's going to connect that to the free monitoring lead of the 3-lead monitor that we have, as we showed you previously, and just drop that to the side. So that remains sterile. The other end of this, we're going to now connect to our needle. And just to reiterate what we're doing here, so we've got 2 electrodes connected to the patient, the third one is connected to the needle. At this point here, with the needle in the air, we'll have a flat line. As soon as this needle touches skin, we should get an ECG trace. The principle behind ECG guidance is that if this needle tip touches myocardium, we'll see a current of injury or ST elevation on that ECG. So if we go in under negative pressure along our proposed trajectory and we get a needle full of blood back and we've seen no ST elevation to that point, we can be pretty confident that we have not traversed myocardium and that we're in the pericardial space. So having all of that information prior to the procedure allows us to plan. So we've got our echo information, we know we're at a depth of 3.5 centimetres. So the next thing to do is just to get your anatomical landmarks. So I can feel the xiphesternum there and I can feel the notch there. So we've already put local anaesthetic in here, of course, and we're now going in. So I'm putting the needle into the xiphesternal notch, and I'm aiming for that left shoulder along the sort of trajectory that we've planned out with the echo probe. And I'm going to go under negative pressure under ECG guidance. So we know that if I get to about halfway along that needle and I've got no blood back, I'm doing something wrong and I need to stop at that point because we should have hit the pericardial space. So I'm now going to go forward under negative pressure, keeping an eye, getting an assistant to keep an eye on the ECG as we go in, going forward, and we've got blood back in the syringe, and to that point we've had no ST elevation. So now that we've got the wire in position, we can use our ultrasound probe in its sterile cover to try and make sure that the wire is in the pericardial space. So if we go in, if we're lucky, we'll pick up the wire on the screen in its long axis view, which makes it very easy to determine that the wire is extracardiac and in the pericardial space. Now, if we took that image and we found it to be only partially visible because it's in short axis, what we need to do is to try and bring it down to long axis view. The simplest way to do that is to look at your imaging probe and remember that the imaging sector is in that plane. So to try and get the wire in an in-plane section, now we've entered the subxiphesternal space in that sort of angle. So if we have the probe angle so that it's in plane, in line with the wire, you can immediately see the wire in long axis, and there it is. And again, you can see it's distinct from the heart. If you just tilt the probe, you can see it. So if you have difficulty locating the wire, particularly if you've got difficulty trying to find a long axis view of it, the way to do that is to make sure you use the probe in its long axis approach to try and find that wire. So we've now got the guide wire in the pericardial space. We've confirmed that with echo. We're going to now dilate up the track. We've already put a nick in the skin with the scalpel blade that's available in the pack. It's very important at this point to understand how guide wires work. Now, guide wires are only as good as the support that they have at this end, the proximal end. So if we use a guide wire and just push everything through, 9 times out of 10 you won't get into trouble. However, if we just push without holding the back end of this guide wire, the front end has got no real support on it, so you are exposing the patient to risk. If you're going to use a guide wire and you're pushing things through, particularly with force, it's important to have some counter traction on this side and then insert your dilator. And that way, a taut guide wire will ensure that the tip is riding over the guide wire, not penetrating through any tissue. So once we've dilated up the track, the next thing to do is to pick up your pigtail catheter and then pop that onto the wire. And again, these catheters will thread best if the wire is kept taut. The question I often get asked is how far do you go with these? You need to make sure that the holes, it's a multi-hole catheter, that most of the holes are in the pericardial space, and I tend to go about halfway. Then we stop at this point. I can remove the wire, and then at this point I will take one of the 3-way taps that's in the pack, and I will connect that, turn that to off. Now, it's up to you what you do at this stage. I tend to get the circuit set up so that you've connected the bag to the drain. Take your 50mm syringe, connect that to the side port here, turn this off to the bag, and then aspirate back. And just do that, and you will find that for someone who is actually tamponading, taking off 30 or 40 mils will bring almost instantaneous relief to their hemodynamic state. I would then just empty that. I would then just keep doing that until no further blood or fluid is coming back into my syringe, and then leave it on free drainage. The procedure is just to get on and secure the drain with the Mersilk if you're leaving the drain in, for free drainage. Best to put in a suture. I can't really demonstrate it on this task trainer because it tends to pull out the tissues, but best to put a suture in just below the drain, tie that off, and then tie the Mersil in a continuous knot like a lattice across here, and then finish off by putting some gauze on top. Okay. So we've already just shown you echo-facilitated ECG-guided pericardiocentesis, which I think is a very safe and effective method. It allows you to pre-plan and to carry out this procedure in maybe not as blind a way as historically we used to. I think if pericardiocentesis was invented today as a procedure, we'd do it very differently. If you watch an interventional radiologist doing any procedure, they will do it with real-time ultrasound guidance. So just to get some basics out of the way, as you all know, it's an echo probe. The imaging sector fans out in that direction. So if we use the probe in that orientation with the needle going in across the imaging sector in that way, that is out of plane ultrasound guidance. If we have the needle in the plane of the ultrasound field, that's called in-plane ultrasound guidance. So for something like pericardiocentesis, it's vital for us to watch the needle tip go from the skin into the pericardial space to ensure we're not hitting any important structures en route, and therefore the way to do it would be with in-plane ultrasound guidance. Now, if we try and do that freehand, trying to maintain the probe on the chest and the needle in the plane of the ultrasound image is incredibly difficult and has quite a steep learning curve, I think. So there are ways around this, and these are needle guides which are very familiar to interventional radiologists, and each ultrasound probe that's available, whether it's a linear probe or an echo probe, have specific brackets that are made by different companies. This is made by a company called Sivco, I think it's pronounced Sivco, they're an American company, and it's designed to just clip on to that particular probe. This is the non-disposable, non-sterile portion, so we put this on first, and then we put a sterile sheath on this, and after that we have a sterile portion which comes in a sterile pack, which is this, which is disposable, which comes without an insert, which then clips on over the sterile bag onto that needle guide, and then it comes with a range of inserts. This one's a 16 gauge one, but we'll need a 14 gauge one, and that just then slides in, and then the needle can be introduced, and the needle is always in the plane of the ultrasound beam. So the sterile pack portion of it is here. We've now got a sterile sheath cover over the non-disposable bracket which is there, and that's ready to go. It's adjustable, so that clips on, but this bit here is adjustable so that we can change the angle of approach with the needle, should we desire. This is the bracket that comes on with a clamp that just clamps on over the top of the sterile sheath, and that's now pretty secure. This is a 14 gauge needle, so we're going to pick out the 14 gauge insert. And that just slots in. That then allows us to slot in our needle that we're going to be using, and we're now ready to go. So one of the questions that people always ask me is, what's the cost of this? The non-disposable part that's reused all the time, the bracket here, is about £350. The disposable inserts, which is what you'll need every time, is about £7 to £10. So we've now got the needle guide on, needle in place, and the ultrasound probe ready to go. We're now ready to go. We've got the needle guide and the needle in place. We're going to take another image, and I think we're on freeze, so we're going to unfreeze, which is great. Get the image that we want, and we can see a nice window there for us to aim for. And we can now go forwards with the needle. Importance here is to push at the end of the needle so we don't laterally displace the needle out of the imaging sector, and you can see the tip there very nicely. Take the stilette out. At that point we can then advance our wire. So now that we've got the wire in position, we can use our ultrasound probe in its sterile cover to try and make sure that the wire is in the pericardial space. So if we're lucky, we'll pick up the wire on the screen in its long axis view, which makes it very easy to determine that the wire is extracardiac and in the pericardial space. Now, if we took that image and we found it to be only partially visible because it's in short axis, what we need to do is to try and bring it down to long axis view. The simplest way to do that is to look at your imaging probe and remember that the imaging sector is in that plane. So to try and get the wire in an in-plane section, now we've entered the subxiphesternal space in that sort of angle. So if we have the probe angled so that it's in plane, in line with the wire, you can immediately see the wire in long axis, and there it is. And again, you can see it's distinct from the heart. If you just tilt the probe, you can see it. So if you have difficulty locating the wire, particularly if you've got difficulty trying to find a long axis view of it, the way to do that is to make sure you use the probe in its long axis approach to try and find that wire.